Please introduce yourself, tell us a few words about yourself and your experience.
So I'm Tristan Kromer. I work for a company called Luxor. We design an online curriculum for entrepreneurs that's used by accelerator programs like Happy Farm. It's been used by 500 startups and by the White House Innovation Fellows and some other accelerators around the world.
And what projects are you interested in generally? What projects do you choose as a mentor and advisor?
I don't really focus on the project so much because I am a very bad judge of what is a good idea. So I've heard some ideas. I actually used to sit in the same office space as Instagram, and I remember the first time I talked to them and I said, what is your project? And they told me like, oh, we're doing a photo sharing app. And I said, oh, that's nice. And $1 billion later, I was like, oh, turned out that was a very good idea. But it sounded totally uninteresting to me at the time. I had absolutely no interest in it. So I'm a terrible judge of what's a good idea and what's a bad idea. So I will work with the teams that I think are focused on learning. If the team is focused on learning, and I believe they're focused on that prospect, then I'll work with them and try and help them in that quest, and I'll let them learn what is a good idea and what is a bad idea from the customers.
I see. And regarding to the learning, what is the core and key principles of Luxor program for entrepreneurs? The core curriculum of Luxor program lasts 5 or 7 weeks. How does this program work, and what progress can the startups make during this period?
Well, the Luxor curriculum is focused on teaching good habits, so entrepreneurial skills that the startups can use over and over again to get closer and closer and closer to success. So we don't look at the 5 weeks or the 7 weeks, depending on how you roll it out, as by the end of 7 weeks you will have a successful product. Like, that's not realistic. What we try and teach is how to go about learning from your customers. So we teach things like how do you interview customers and get relevant data? How do you measure your progress in terms of quantitative data? What sort of metrics are you going to look at? So how do you identify your customer in the first place? These are the sort of things we teach to become a habit for the entrepreneurs in the startup to indoctrinate their entire culture in a culture of learning. So this is what we focus on. And from there, we believe if we can teach this successfully, then eventually that startup will succeed. But not in 7 weeks, not in 14 weeks, not on a timetable. They will succeed over time, one step at a time.
If a startup, if a team wants to learn these principles, and the startup has to apply for the program, yes?
No, with the Luxor curriculum, any entrepreneur in the world can go online today and buy that program. It's taught entirely online with some forums so that you can get feedback from coaches. So this program is available to anyone, anywhere in the world, and they can sign up today.
I see. And who developed this program? And am I not mistaken that it was developed first for the US market, or is it a universal tool?
Well, so the program was developed by Janice Fraser, Kate Rudder, and Jason Fraser are the founders. It came out first from Luxor originally stands for Lean User Experience Residency. So it was actually a little bit of a kind of accelerator itself. Teams would come into the Luxor office and spend 1 day there for 10 weeks. And they would learn these same principles of how to make progress, how to measure progress, how to talk to your customers, how to get good feedback. So it came from this. It was developed in terms of how to learn. It wasn't specifically for the US market or the Ukrainian market or the Russian market or anything like this. It was how to learn. So these principles apply anywhere in the world. What Luxor has done is they've taken those principles that they developed early on in that residency program and transformed that into an online curriculum.
I see, thank you. And you are the Lean Startup Coach at Luxor,
yes?
And could you please describe the key principles of this approach? What is the main advantage, and how is the Lean Startup approach correlated with the Luxor program?
The Luxor program is based on user experience principles first and foremost. So Janice Fraser, our founder, was also the founder of Adaptive Path, one of the founders of Adaptive Path. But it turns out a lot of the user experience principles are the same as Lean Startup principles. They're both based on getting rapid feedback and great feedback from the customer and using that in an iterative process to learn. Lean Startup has really codified that mentality and brought it to the mainstream, brought it across business. So you've got the business people and the designers and the developers all speaking the same language now. The language of build, measure, learn is what Lean Startup says. So user experience has also said that, they just said it in a different way. Think, make, check. So that's the founding core of Lean Startup and user experience. And what Luxor has done has really synthesized a lot of those ideas and focusing on those habits. How do we learn? How do we measure progress? So that's the core principles it's based on, is just what I've said previously. How do we learn? How do we learn as fast as possible? How do we make that a habit in our company to focus on learning and making progress in the learning?
Thank you. And Tristan, what are the most serious problems that startups are facing on their way to success? What do you think about it, and how to avoid them or solve them?
Lots of startups encounter different difficulties. The most common difficulty is that nobody wants to buy the thing that they have created. Flat out. Nobody cares. Like, nobody has that problem that the entrepreneurs think they're solving, or those people don't exist. They simply, it's a hallucination. So we like to say in Silicon Valley, there's this famous thing about Steve Jobs having a reality distortion field, that when you were near Steve Jobs, you couldn't see straight. You just believed in his vision, and his vision would actually change the world. He would change the world with his presence. That was the reality distortion field. So the problem that most people have, most startups have, is they think they have a reality distortion field. It's just facing the wrong way. Like, they can't see reality, but reality doesn't care about what they're talking about. Like, it's just a one-way reality distortion field. So they have this, it's a hallucination instead of a vision for the future. So again, if they're not focused on learning, if they're not focused on testing their product with real customers, then they're just building and hoping for the best. So this is the biggest problem.
Thank you. And Tristan, now you met here more than 10 startups from Ukraine and other CIS countries. What do you think about the level and potential of these projects, or maybe teams, and which of them impressed you most?
I think the level of the teams is really roughly comparable to a lot of the different teams I've seen in Helsinki, in London, and I talked to entrepreneurs from all over the world. I spent last week, I was on the phone with some startups in Ramallah, Palestine, and the same in Silicon Valley. So entrepreneurs all over the world, they may have different resources, like there's less funding available here in Ukraine than there is in Silicon Valley, but the general challenge, that general focus on, are we a company dedicated to learning? And are we going to learn if anybody wants our product? Or how should we change our product? Or should we target a different customer? It's the same challenge faced by entrepreneurs all over the world. So I see a lot of potential in the companies I've seen here. Some of them are already making money. So that's great. Some of them already have thousands of users signed up. So this is a lot better than many incubators I've seen. The teams that I like the most, again, are not necessarily those with the most users or the most revenue. But I like the teams that are really focused on learning. When I see 3 people who are focused on one objective, how do we learn if we're right? How can we validate if we're right? That's more impressive to me than a team where you have one developer who just stays in his corner and develops code, and one designer who just stays and sketches and makes pretty pixels, and one business guy who just stands at the wall, but none of them are talking to each other, none of them are talking to the customer. I don't care how many users they have. I'm not impressed. I don't care. So I see some great potential here in terms of everybody seems to me to be focused on the right thing. How do I learn about my product? How do I learn about the customer? How do I learn about the value proposition? And is there any sort of product market fit here?
Thank you. And please give some useful tips for startups, some short maybe advices.
Talk to your customer.
Cool.
It's easy.
And the last question, what are your impressions about Happy Farm? Maybe something you want to tell?
I think it's great. Like, my experience here has been very good. The teams seem very enthusiastic. They're all very young. It's a very young incubator, which is kind of fun because they have some awesome ideas. It's not like they've been sitting in a corporation for 20 years getting jaded. They're very enthusiastic. They want to learn. So that's very fun to see. And I like the environment here. I like this brightly colored place with its green borscht for lunch and a little bit of a party going on here at 12 o'clock at night, I guess, with these guitars. So I like it here.